COVID-19 tips sponsored by Dex Soap. 1. Practice social distancing. 2. Wear your mask when leaving the house. 3. Wash your hands regularly for 20 seconds using our Dex Soap. 4. Cover your nose and mouth with a disposable tissue or flex elbow when you cough or sneeze. Choose Dex Soap for that extra cleanliness. Dex Soap is affordable and available nationwide.
Enter room 592 with Dr. Mahadeo and Leonard Gildarie. Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays from 19 hours 30 to 21 hours. Local, regional, and international voices dissecting the bigger matters, challenging and being challenged with one aim: to unleash the truth. Room 592 on Kaieteur Radio.
3, 2, 1.
And we are live from the studios of Kaieteur Radio, 24 Saffron Street in Guyana. It is Friday night. Good evening, everyone. It is time to enter room 592 with Dr. Mahadeo alongside his co-host, senior journalist of Kaieteur News, Mr. Leonard Gildarie, educating us this evening about what is a chowti or chowki and a belna. You can come to him for these interesting Guyanese facts. Good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening. Good evening, Mr. Kevin Smith. Good evening, my co-host, Mr. Leonard Gildarie, and good evening, Excellency. How are you guys tonight?
I'm good, Yog. How are you?
Very well, thank you. My co-host, Leonard Gildarie, what have you been telling the boys? Have you been telling them how you were being run with Helena?
Let me tell the people what it is that they ask, and the good Excellency, how you doing? The boys were asking what's a chowti. I said I don't know what's a chowti. I think I learned the word chowki, and this is something that I grew up. It's a wrong wooden something like it, and I think Raj is telling me it's from India. That chowki in India is like a table. So I said it's chowki, not chowti. So they learned something. Every day we learn something here.
Very good, very good. Well, ladies and gentlemen, wherever you're joining us from, all across the world, all across the Caribbean, Guyana, and of course our listeners joining us over radio and the fellow broadcasters who are carrying us live by various television stations, to you all. Welcome to room 592, where we unleash the truth. And ladies and gentlemen, we're privileged tonight to have a distinguished gentleman who has been, I would rather say, more Guyana than a lot of Guyanese have been over the couple of months, couple of years. And Mr. Greg Quinn, Honorable Greg Quinn, High Commissioner, British High Commissioner to Guyana, would have certainly etched his name in the history of Guyana. Ladies and gentlemen, when our sons and daughters will be reading up on the history of this country, especially during these couple of years, Mr. Honorable Greg Quinn's name would certainly be up there. And sir, we want to just say thank you for being here in Guyana. Thank you for doing all that you have done, and welcome you to your room 592. It is unlikely for me to really say to you a welcome and a farewell, but you know how life goes.
Yes. All good things come to an end, Yog, and my time here is coming to an end now after 5.5 years in Guyana.
Yes. So, High Commissioner, it has been a full 5 year, won't you say? A 5 year that I guess and I hope would really be on top of your distinguished diplomatic career, sir.
Oh, I mean, whenever I arrived here, I was expecting to be here for 3 years. I've been extended 3 times. I've done 2 elections, 2 local elections. We could talk about later about all the other stuff. But this was also, of course, the first time I've ever actually been a head of mission. So there's any number of reasons why my time here in Guyana is special. And it's been a really good time, and I'm really sad to be leaving.
Great. And let me say, I would rather think it is 3 elections, because don't forget the local government elections that would have happened in between.
Actually, 2 local government elections, so it's 4. 4, of course.
That itself is another distinguishing mark for you, sir, because guess what? For a long time, before these last local government elections, we didn't have many years.
No, I mean, what was it, 21 years up until the first set of local government elections in 2016. So, yeah, and something which we had advocated, my predecessors had advocated very strongly for, were those, as had our colleagues, our local government elections. So 2 sets of local government elections as well as 2 general and regional elections is a lot.
Indeed, sir. And sir, August 2nd, 5 months after March 2nd, but it did eventually happen.
Yep.
What are your thoughts now, sir? We are in a democracy finally. Your thoughts?
I mean, I think it was a declaration based on a credible recount, which we all thought it was a credible recount. We called for the elections to be declared on the basis of the recount. It was the right decision. It took 5 months, too long, but you know, we got there in the end, and we are now in a place where, you know, we can start looking forward, and we can start sort of talking about how Guyana develops, having been what I think was a very difficult and stressful 5-month period for a lot of people, Yog. And I think, you know, it's now up to the new government, the new legitimate government, to push forward with the manifesto and with what President Ali said in his inauguration address last week.
And sir, if you don't mind me putting this on you right at the top of the show here, you would have come in for a lot of flack. You and the other diplomats stood on a particular path, and you came in for a lot of flack. Notwithstanding that, what does you as a distinguished diplomat say to the now opposition?
I think they have a role. I mean, any democracy needs 2 sides. It needs to have a government and it needs to have an opposition. And the opposition has a very important role in holding the government and the administration to account. And I expect the opposition to do that with gusto and vigor, and do its job. And if it sees wrong, to point out that wrong. If it sees, you know, if it sees a situation where maybe it can contribute, to contribute. The nature of democracy is there's a winner and a loser. The nature of the system here is a winner and a loser. And that's just the way it is. And I'm sure we'll talk later about constitutional reform and such like. But the important thing, you know, is I think this opposition, the previous coalition government, has a very important role to play in continuing the democratic principles which exist in this country.
Thank you for that, sir. If you don't mind, High Commissioner, you would have been 5.5 years now. So you would have been here when the PPP would have demitted office.
Yeah.
At that time, there was a lot of discussion, public discussion about the reformation of the security sector, to which Britain had itself offered to invest heavily in upgrade of our sector. I don't think much happened then. Elections came and went, another elections came and went. But in February this year, you signaled that Britain is still interested in playing its role in the reformation. You want to talk us through it a little?
I mean, I think more has actually happened over the course of the 5 years than people actually see, because the nature of some reform is a lot of it is done behind the scenes. It's not necessarily very public. So I think where we are and what we have done over 5 years has gotten us to a good solid basis. And certainly our desire and our hope, and based on what the president has said, is that we will now move to a phase of implementing a lot of the work and a lot of the recommendations which were put forward in the previous 5 years. Did I wish things had happened a bit more quickly? Well, yes, of course. But the nature of government and the nature of the system is sometimes it goes slower than you expect. It certainly does in the UK. But certainly there's a desire to continue that work on security sector reform here, as there is in other areas as well.
Why security sector reform, sir?
Well, I mean, I think this has been something which we've been working on in reality for 20 years. If you go back to the early 2000s, there was a request put to the UK to help with security sector reform to make the police force in particular more impactful, and to increase the level of trust and respect within the general populace. And fundamentally, in any system, you need to have public trust and public respect in the law enforcement agencies. And at the same time, you need to make sure those law enforcement agencies are as efficient in terms of how they manage their finances, in terms of how they have leadership as possible. And so what we have been looking to do is to sort of put in place the most efficient, or to help put in place the most efficient and most effective police force there can be. It's not an easy job sometimes. And there's in any country, there's a lot of suspicion and a lot of questions about the activities of law enforcement. But I think our desire is to push that forward to make the police and other parts of the security sector as efficient, as effective, and as respected as possible.
Right. High Commissioner, if you don't mind me, based on your working in a number of countries, and of course from your homeland too, security sector reform in a country like Guyana, where everything is politicized,
mm-hmm.
does it make it more difficult? And allow me here, sir. Given this last election, given what had happened, a lot of persons have seen actions taken by the police force itself as having been politically tainted.
Mm-hmm.
So you rightly mentioned confidence in the police force is one of the biggest things. How do we then go about getting to that level?
Well, I think there's two things here. Let me first talk about, sometimes there's a lot of perception of a particular issue, even if it is not an issue in reality. So some people might believe there's a certain situation, or a certain approach, which might not actually be the case. But in many respects, it doesn't matter if it isn't the case. What matters is the perception. So organizations, any government organization, any law enforcement organization needs to think about how a certain action might be perceived. And that's a leadership issue as much as anything. Secondly, you talk about the difficulties. Well, as you say, let's go back to Northern Ireland, my home country, a place where the police force was viewed with great suspicion by one side of our religious divide. Huge suspicion. And part of the whole reconciliation and peace process that we went through, which was a very difficult process in many ways, because lots of people had to compromise and change their positions for the greater good. And one of the major changes, obviously, which came out of the Northern Ireland Police, the Northern Ireland peace process, was changing what was the Royal Ulster Constabulary to the Police Service of Northern Ireland, and to change the leadership, because one of the major things which came out of the whole process was the lack of trust in one side of the community. So it's a difficult process, but we have shown, and it's not perfect, Yoke. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. Northern Ireland is not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. But the fact of the matter is, as I've said before, where there is a will, there is a way. Where there's a will, there's a way, and no obstacle is insurmountable.
Correct. Thank you, sir. And indeed, I think a lot of Guyanese, we welcome a robust, professional police force that will act way above, what may have been the inefficient modalities. Sir, my last thing on the security sector reform is twofold. The one is the whole aspect of Guyana in the past, and that has always been maybe being viewed as a transshipment point for drugs. That's in the UK's estimation of a reform of security sector in Guyana. And the second one is, you would appreciate, having been here for 5.5 years, the porous nature of our borders, which makes national security also a good one, isn't it?
Yeah, the second point first, hugely difficult problem. Whenever you've got a population of 750,000, 800,000 people, 83,000 square kilometers of of land space. I mean, it's a huge problem having the resources to do it. And there will always be criminal elements who will take advantage of it. So it's a real challenge going forward. And there's ways you can use technology or maritime or aerial assets to overcome that lack of boots on the ground, for want of a term. And the drugs and the transshipment, it has been historically a fact of life of coming from here. But that's a result partly of the second one. It's not necessarily Guyanese doing this. It's others, others from other countries doing it. But one of the things that you see is, drug dealers will go to the places where it is easier for them to do business. So if you toughen up in the regulations, if you toughen up in the shipment stuff going out of Georgetown, they will go elsewhere. So there's things which you can do to make life difficult for those drug transshippers,
Right.
which means it doesn't solve the problem, but it moves it elsewhere, and then you have to sort of deal with it. You have to deal with it elsewhere. And some of the work which we have been trying to do, and some of our colleagues have been trying to do, is to make Guyana more broadly unattractive to these people.
That's well put, Leonard. Make Guyana unattractive to these people.
No, I
Well
would
said.
agree with that. I would always say to the good High Commissioner, like I say to you, Yog, I don't tolerate people saying anything unattractive by my beautiful lady called Guyana. But it is what it is, huh? But and I know. Do you like our? I must ask the good commissioner this. Do you believe that our food is better than Great Britain?
That's a very unfair question, Leonard. But what I
Why? Because
will
you.
say is we do share a
Yes.
very clear. uh, we share a very very clear love of curry. I mean, the national dish of the UK now is effectively curry. I mean, let's be in no doubt about that. So I do like my curry. I love my pepper pot, no question about that. I have come to enjoy spicy food a lot more since I've been here than I used to in the UK, because that's what everybody says. British food is bland and boring. Come here, get a bit of spice, far better.
I'd be very curious to know what they call it, whether it's chicken curry or curry chicken, because that would be very thing.
Well, it's obviously chicken curry, isn't it?
Well,
We're
you.
not we're not we're not in Trinidad. It's chicken curry.
All right, very good. I'm glad that you backed us on that. I want to bring you back. I want to bring you back to this election thing because a lot of persons.
Uh-huh.
One of the things that really shocked me during this election time, I probably never really paid attention, was the amount of attacks on persons, and then we saw it on the diplomats as well. Is this something that is
Mhm.
normal? What were your thoughts of that? I think you came in. I think you did mention that, but you came in for some severe attack as well as Lillian Chatterjee of the Canadian High Commission. What were some of your thoughts going through your mind? Is this normal?
Well, I mean, it's sort of sometimes it does come with the territory, Leonard. I mean, in my 25 years in the Foreign Service, I've been tear gassed, I've been baton charged by policemen, I've been shot at. Being called names and whatever is the lower end of some of the more difficult things I've had. It's unpleasant, obviously. I think sometimes it's unnecessary, and but fundamentally, I and my colleagues were doing, and over 120 other different countries. I mean, it wasn't just me. It wasn't just three or four of us. It was over 120 countries who were sitting there making a very clear stand for the fundamental principles of democracy, good governance, rule of law, which we in the UK and also Guyana, as a member of the Commonwealth, as a member of CARICOM, has signed up to. And
Hmm.
so, therefore, there are comments about interference in sovereignty. Well, actually, it's not interference because it's standing up for the rights and responsibilities which all of us have agreed to.
And yes, and as we continue on the elections, sir, I have two questions before I hand over to my very gracious host. On the election, when was it clear to the diplomats and maybe to yourself that something was wrong, that the election was being rigged? And that's the use of the word is out there. And Are persons identified as facilitating the rigging or taking an active part? Are they still to be sanctioned or still under sanction?
I think there's still a discussion that we're having about, we talked about, the foreign secretary talked about consequences for some individuals, for some actions. And I think there's still a discussion to be had about how we take those forward, because ultimately wrongdoing cannot go without consequences. So that's a discussion that's still ongoing. On the first part, I think it was probably Leonard. Was it the third, the fourth? Was it the 4th of March? I must admit, I've lost track really. But it was that day whenever the spreadsheet started to be used, whenever the returning officer started to read that declaration. It was very clear to everybody who was in Ashman's, from all of the observer groups, that this was not producing a credible result. There were 879 statements of polls. We hadn't even got through half of those before the process was suddenly changed. And I think that's when everybody started to question where this was going and how this was not credible.
Mm-hmm.
And on that day, on March 13th, I think it was, Leonard, when the diplomatic community said the following words: "Don't do anything that could lead to Guyana's isolation."
Mm.
And I think, sir, unfortunately, it took 4 additional months therefrom before we, and I must say this, and your thoughts, please. It is actually the fear of international repercussions and the reality of sanctions that may have very well seen the end of that period in our history. Your thoughts, sir?
I mean, there was as you well know, there was a long train of legal processes, and it was only really, if you think about the Chief Justice's last ruling, before the last Court of Appeal ruling, where she had said, look, this is res judicata. We have been here, we have done that. That hadn't been so clearly articulated before. And I think that very clear articulation of the fact that everything that could possibly be discussed outside of an elections petition has been discussed. So guys, time to move on and go to something different. And I think that's where we now need to go. It's now about I think there's going to be a lot written about the last 5 months or the last 18 months or the last whatever. And that's fine. But now is the time to start thinking about, okay, we have a new government. We have a very clear outlook of what the president says he wants to do. Now we need to start working with that government and with the government to start helping to deliver that and deliver it for every single man and woman and child in this country, because that's the key thing. And the second thing is, the system has got to change. We cannot be in this place in 2025. We cannot go through the last 5 months in 2025 because it was stressful for everyone. It had an economic impact, never mind the COVID additional on top of that. It just was not for the country. And so therefore the system needs to be changed to ensure we don't go through it again in 5 years' time.
Well said, sir. Leonard and I would have on radio daily. We were on this thing every day for the past 5 months. And one of the things I did express publicly is whatever a government does, it creates a precedence for the future, a dangerous precedent sometimes. And you are right. Critical reforms are needed so that precedents would not be used. Sir, GCOM.
Yeah.
You know, in terms of what would have happened in the past, the president did announce they're going to do the forensic. They're going to have a commission of inquiry, according to the vice president's release today. It's going to be a commission of inquiry. Leonard, our prophetic words have borne fruit today. I'm proud of that. But sir, to you, how would the British government, how are you guys interested in seeing that the Elections Commission can be reformed? But hear me out with this. Guyana has such a robust system. I mean, we have rules upon rules, ID cards, which not many countries use, and all of these restrictions in place. But yet, there has been problems. What else can we reform?
So I think, you know, if you go back to GCOM's creation in its current phase, you know, 1992, it was never meant to still be in its current form in 2020. And every election report that has come from every election subsequently has talked about the need to reform GCOM because it was designed for a specific time and a specific situation. So there's lots of stuff out there, and you know, about how there needs to be a change in GCOM, and I certainly would agree with that. But I think there's the broader constitutional reform as well, which needs to be done. And this needs to be a process which is driven from the bottom up. You know, it needs to be a process which is driven by, so the people need to be told that they might not get everything they ask for, but it needs to be driven from the man and woman on the street. It needs to be driven by civil society. It needs to be driven by the media. This is not a process which should be from the politicians down. And the reason it needs to be driven from the bottom is that then you have everybody buying into the process. And then it works, filters up through the system, and then you have at least 2/3 of the National Assembly voting for it, which means all of the political parties have to vote for it. And therefore, they are all committed to it. And if they don't then deliver on it, then they have to justify why they were suddenly in a position, they were suddenly in favor of a point X, but are no longer. Now, the fact is, when did we last have any sort of constitutional reform here, 20 years ago? That's a long time, you know. So it's easy for people to forget or not be committed to it in the same way. But clearly, this last 5 months has shown that the system as is, be it GCOM or be it more broadly, does not work and needs to be changed, or else in 5 years' time, we risk being in exactly the same position. And I'm not sure how many of us could survive another 5 months like the last 5 months.
Of course. And let's talk a little bit about constitutional reform, sir. You did mention it. And so it is critical. Constitutional reform will require, in a lot of ways, 2/3 of the parliament. The way the political divide is presently, I don't know that we are going to get that 2/3, are we?
But this is where the other part of this, and you've heard me talk a lot more over the last 5 months, Yog, about reconciliation. Because I think there needs to be this fundamental reconciliation like we had in Northern Ireland, albeit with a far more extreme situation. But there needs to be a process where the leadership of, you know, the leadership brings their supporters to understand that there needs to be compromise, that the other side has got legitimate concerns which need to be taken into account. And that that they're brought into a new process. And then, if that happens, you make it easier to do the reform. Now, there's a lot to be done in, you know, a compressed period of time, but I think you do need to address the legitimate concerns that exist amongst pockets, or not pockets, but amongst people on both sides of the ethnic divide about the other side. And until you get people in a better place about things like that, then you're right, it is going to be difficult to do the reform. But on the reconciliation piece, whereas constitutional reform might be bottom up, the reconciliation piece has to be top down, because the politicians have to show and have to explain to their supporters why this is the right thing to do and why it is the good thing to do for the betterment of everybody. And as we saw in Northern Ireland, when people pull together, and it's still not perfect, I've said that before to you, when we move to a better place in the centre, everybody benefited. Everybody benefited. And the Northern Ireland of today, economically, politically, whatever, is a better place because both sides compromised and changed than it was whenever the two groups were stuck at extreme ends.
Correct. Hi, Commissioner, just to change topic a little bit. So after here, where are you heading for, sir?
Well, I'm heading for 4 weeks holiday, first of all. So that's the first plan. And then ironically, if you think you're getting rid of me, I'm sorry, because certainly in the short term, I'm going to be working on the Caribbean and Guyana back in London. So I'm still going to be involved in what happens here. I'll be trying not to have my 5,000-mile long screwdriver. I'll be trying to resist the temptation of that and telling them what to do. But I'm still going to be doing Guyana.
Great. I'm reminded, sir, in Guyana, unfortunately, your politicians, a lot of them, they want to hold on to this notion called power forever and ever and ever, right? People don't want to give up at all. And I'm mindful of an article I read when Tony Blair when he got out of power. I remember a month later, I can't remember who was the author of the article, but somebody wrote that, the time will soon come when Tony Blair will hop into the back of a cab and the driver will peer at him through the rearview mirror and say, I've seen you on TV. I hope that's no time. It's no near time for you, sir. You are going to be in public life quite some time as yet. Sir, I want to just come right back to the Elections Commission. I see Leonard has a question to ask you there, but let me ask you first of all, do you think that the format of selecting a chairman of GCOM requires a revisit as well? Forget the commission itself.
Well, actually, I mean, I think everything's always open for debate, but the principle of having a chair of GCOM who's agreed between the political parties. Now, I think the question now is you have a situation where you have a third group, they have the rejoinder list now, who have a seat in Parliament. So I think, it's probably not just a question of one and the other agreed. There has to be an input for this third group now. But, so I think generally this how you select a chair is fine. I think the broader issue is the commissioners and the fact that the way, as long as you have the system it is at the minute, you are always going to have a situation which is very confrontational with 3 versus 3, which puts the chair in a hugely difficult position. The chair should not be the casting vote so often. The chair of any organization should be bringing everybody together to consensus, not having to vote with this side or that side.
Absolutely. Leonard?
Yes, and I do thank you for that. And I want to bring you straight to oil and gas, big
Yes.
issue here. And of course, I know that you have a lot you would want to say. Since 2015, there's been a lot being said in the newspaper, especially in Kaieteur News, especially. And I want to ask you, sir, whether it is that you're satisfied with the current level of oil and gas governance in Guyana. That's my first part. I'm going to come back to you. I want to hear what you have to say.
I mean, I think, we've got to remember where Guyana started off on this and how you have gone from discovery to production in a very fast period of time with a very small government in terms of human numbers, in terms of people. So I think, there may well be an argument that you should bring in some capacity in a short term to help you with governance, that there needs to be a bit of a look at how you do local content, how you do a petroleum commission, etc., how you do a sovereign wealth fund. I mean, my view, leaving aside the very positive aspects I have about the potential of oil and gas to help the broader development of the country, which we can talk about later if you want. But in terms of governance, I think any British company welcomes a very clear set of rules for how they operate, as long as those rules are also very realistic. So let's talk local content, for example. If you say you want to have local content, fantastic. British companies will love that because that's what they want. They're quite happy to go with local. They want to build up local capacity. But you can't expect that local content to go from 0 to 100% in a day. So you need to put in place, this is what I mean by realistic. You need to say, okay, we accept that in this particular area, we haven't got the expertise locally. So we agree that you can bring in, an expat to do that. But in return, we expect you to train up a local to replace that expat in 2 years, 1 year, 3 years, whatever is a realistic time scale. So I think that, realistic legislation and clear legislation so that everybody knows what the rules are and also that the rules are fairly applied to everyone. So nobody gets special dispensations. Everybody is treated equally.
And with which I would have wanted to follow up, and which is a question that somebody has sent in here. What are some of the, if you were in a position to advise the government and the people of Guyana, what would you say to them that would help us keep the tentacles of oil companies out of our governance structure?
I'm not quite sure I know the answer. I'll have that one, Leonard. But I think the fundamental point is by putting in place policies and legislations which lay out the rules and make the rules very clear and are enforceable and equally applied to everybody. And one of the things which we have been doing here, we have been working with the IMF and the GRA on helping ensure that the GRA has the human capacity and the skills to ensure all large taxpayers, which include obviously oil companies, are paying the taxes that they should pay, so that therefore the country is getting the revenue that it should do. And I think that's the fundamental bit of your question. Have the rules very clear, make sure they're applied equally, but at the same time make sure they're realistic. And if you need outside help at the start to do that, then don't be afraid to bring in outside help. Just because you have to go to somebody else to ask for help in a very specialized area does not mean you're selling out the country. What it means is that you understand there's a lack at the moment in that particular area, and that you are bringing it in to ensure that you get the best deal and the best policy or the best legislation possible.
And so your bottom line there is to ask for help.
I mean, ask for help, take help, bring it in, but at the same time, if you want to, put down, okay, if you want to come in and help us on this, then as I say, we want you to start training up local people to do that work. But also don't forget, there's a large diaspora out there, Leonard. You keep hearing about how there are more people living outside Guyana than living inside Guyana who are Guyanese. It's a bit like the Irish, there are more Irish outside Ireland than in Ireland. But so don't be afraid to ask the diaspora, because they have got skills. they have got experience which you can use. So that's I think my sort of fundamental takeaway, or one of my fundamental takeaways.
But sir, you see, one of the issues we have had in Guyana for decades, and I'm not necessarily asking your comment here, but one of the issues we have had is that governments have always make appointments based on loyalty, period. It's all about party loyalty and not necessarily who's best for what job. Time will tell whether the current government has really made the right appointments. But, I'm really hoping that very soon successive governments of Guyana can look at more professionalism than party loyalties. And that brings me to something that I omitted asking you, sir, when we were talking a little bit about security sector reform. Guyana's had a historical problem with what has been politically bandied around as extrajudicial killing. It has been the bone of contention for racial bitterness, political bitterness, name it. It has not stopped. We had in room 592 a lawyer from Canada here 2 weeks ago who said that, a lot of people don't realize that under the last government, after AFT government, extrajudicial killing occurred. Now, how does a country like Guyana start to address these things seriously, sir?
Well, you're going straight back to the whole reconciliation process, aren't you? There's another, because that's exactly the sort of thing which you would address under a reconciliation process, because people have a deep-seated belief or a deep-seated worry or a deep-seated fear, and by in Northern Ireland, we aired some, really difficult subjects and some really hard subjects. This sort of thing, killings by one side or killings by the other side, and you have. It sounds a bit blasé. It's not meant to be, but by talking and airing grievances, it has a cathartic effect. And sometimes in some things, people just need to feel that they're being listened to and that their concerns are being taken on board to overcome some of that historical. I'm a historian by training. My favorite bit is looking to the past. But the reality is, as we discovered in Northern Ireland, if you're going to benefit everybody in progress, you've got to start looking to the future. And you can't dwell on the past, because if you dwell on the past, it'll kill you. Because there is so much bad stuff in the past. Doesn't mean you don't take the past into account. It doesn't mean that you don't discuss the past. It doesn't mean that the past doesn't feed in. But you need to find a way of dealing with the past in a way that makes people content to then move forward and to think, not forget what happened, but to think, okay, that's done. What do we do thinking about going forward? And this sort of bit about the extrajudicial killings, Yog, I think is perfect, because, as you said, the lawyer from Canada talk, the PNC did this, but the PPP did this. Right. You can bandy these things back and forth forever.
Correct. Sir, diplomatic relations, Britain, Guyana. All diplomatic circles and all embassies and everybody is reforming, especially with COVID-19. And, we have gone through this thing where now Guyanese, I think when we apply for British visa, it takes a processing time. Yeah. It virtually goes out of the country, I think. Is there any sentiment, any change that you foresee that will be coming, given that Guyana will certainly now become one of the go-to places for a lot of you guys, a lot of people?
Well, I think this has been thrown at me quite. We've only become interested in Guyana since oil and gas came along. Well, I would dispute that quite strongly. I think we've been interested in Guyana for a long time, and that the post and pre and post the colonial period. We have had good times and we have had bad times. But the fact of the matter is, we're still friends most of the time. You know, and I remember saying to then President Ramatar when I presented my credentials in February of 2015, you know, friends often differ. And that's what we have done. But yet, despite all of the problems and all of the issues in the past, we're still here. And we're still very close. We're still, as I say, we are equal members of the Commonwealth. We share similar values in the Commonwealth and throughout other organizations. So I think there's been a long-standing interest and long-standing activity. Now on visas, I have never been posted anywhere, with the exception of the US, where visas were not a major bone of contention. And it is certainly my hope and my desire that we will make the process as easy and as simple as possible going forward. There's work to be done on that. It's been far from ideal in the past. I recognize that. And I hope we will be getting ourselves to a better place, because this is about making it easier for Guyanese to go to the UK. Because it's easy for Brits to come here. I mean, let's be honest. It's easy for Brits to come here. But what I want is to make it easier for Guyanese to get to the UK.
After all, if things go the way it ought to go, Guyanese will have a lot of money to spend, and you would want us to spend. High Commission, let me just read to you this message coming from one Mr. Hazrat Ali. He said his opinion is that the Honorable High Commission can play a major role for our country. Please ask him if he would accept citizenship and share his expertise.
This is an interesting one. I would love to hear what his answer is.
I think there's been a few people saying, "Oh, but you've been here for 5.5 years. You can apply for citizenship." Because I'm a common citizen. Yeah, but I've been here as a diplomat, so that rule doesn't apply. I also remember having a discussion with somebody who tried to register me to vote on the basis of the fact that I was a Commonwealth citizen, and I said, "Yes, I'm not." So sadly, despite the length of time here and people thinking I might be eligible for citizenship, the nature of my appointment here prevents that.
Yeah, I understand. And just one more I'll read to you, sir. Audrey Khalidin Aziz says, "We thank you, Honorable Greg Quinn, for standing with the Guyanese people during especially the 5 months of frustration, mental health issues, just to name a few, that you stood by our side so democracy can prevail. You will never be forgotten. We love you. God bless you." That's from one of our viewers here, sir. High Commission, I need to ask you this.
Mm-hmm.
Memories of Guyana that you're going to take with you. Places. So tell us one or two of the places you visited here, sir.
I mean, the problem is, with being here 5.5 years, there's so many of them. And one of the things which I've always done throughout my career is get out of the capital as much as possible. So I've been all the way to the western border with Venezuela. I've been all the way down to Oriala in the east. I've been down to Sand Creek. I've been in lots of places in between. And, you know, I've got lots of different memories, or lots of very good memories from lots of places. I must admit, and I apologize to my friends along the coast for this, I do have a particular soft spot for the Rupununi. And my staff, the staff here, or the team here at the High Commission, actually had a painting of the Rupununi done specially for me as a leaving gift, because they know that. And I have lots of very happy memories of spending lots of good time down in the Rupununi. And it's the getting away from the capital and just sitting there and not having any internet and not having any phone signal and just having the world go by and watching it go by.
Yes, indeed, indeed. That will be something I guess you will be remembering, and certainly visiting again for that experience. Sir,
I'm sure.
your message to the Guyanese people. Everybody's online, everybody is listening on radio. We have people from Pomeroon, Caribbean, all over. Nickerie also is tuned in, Caribbean. Your message to the Guyanese people.
I think it's very simple. You know, we keep hearing this stuff about the potential of Guyana. It is clearly there. Now is the chance. Everybody works together, the politicians and the people. This country can become a country which will benefit every single person that lives here, but also can become, as it once was before, a very clear leader within the region. I think now is a good time to be Guyanese, and there is a huge opportunity here for Guyana to really drive forward.
Great.
I'm just sorry I won't be here to see it, Yog.
Well, you know what? Maybe next time, Leonard, we certainly know that since the High Commissioner will be involved in Caribbean and, of course, Guyana, we're going to the future, he will not be able to resist taking the first opportunity to visit us again. And you know what? Remember, we have another elections coming up in 2025, so who knows? Who knows what's going to happen? If they're done that, so who knows? Let us see. Sir, on behalf of Room 592 and the Guyanese people, what one of our viewers would have sent in there, that message, I think it echoes all of our sentiments. And we do appreciate what you and the other diplomats would have stood for, especially during these 5 months. But also, there is a reason I raised the part about the security sector reform. Leonard raised the part about the oil sector. There is a lot of areas that a developed nation like Britain and other countries will really be helpful to Guyana, and we certainly look forward to the continued collaboration, and we really appreciate what you have done here personally, sir. When are you expecting to be leaving our shores?
Sometime before the end of this month. Exact details not yet done, but I would expect to be leaving, flights allowing, before the end of this month, yeah.
Great. Leonard?
That would be very unfortunate because we had some plans for the good commissioner, but COVID-19 has restricted us. But I've loved for you to probably tell us, maybe be a little more specific. How do we go forward healing what would have been some very bad, bad things that would have happened to us over the last 5 months, ethnically and otherwise. So I'm not sure, maybe very quickly you could tell us what we could do.
Well, actually, it's interesting you say that, Leonard, because I think it's a very difficult subject. And one of the things which I will be tasked with whenever I go back is to try and distill all of that stuff from Northern Ireland and the stuff from here to try and come up with a sort of a simple version, which would then cover, because I think it's too complicated a process to really explain it in 20 seconds, to be perfectly honest. But fundamentally, I think the two parts are political leadership and a clear belief and feeling in the population that they have had a chance to air their grievances. They have been listened to. Some of what they've wanted, they have got, not everything. And that if they've had to compromise, they realize the need to compromise is for the greater good.
Mm-hmm. And I want to say thank you very much, Commissioner. You've always been very engaging through Kaieteur News, and I know the rest of Guyanese people. To echo what Yog and the other folks would have said, it's always been a pleasure. You've always been open, diplomatic at times, but very open to answering questions.
You're most welcome. It's always been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Hi, Commissioner. Thank you so very much. And we do appreciate your company here in Room 592. May I extend an invitation to you, sir? After you have gone back and you're settled into your new role there, do drop into Room 592 at some time and tell us how it's going.
I will do. I'll be more than happy. Although don't forget, I'll be 5 hours ahead of you. So I'll
at the back of my mind, that's exactly the reason I want to do
I'll be more than happy to.
to see you with those red bleary eyes at midnight in so look forward to that chat, sir. High Commissioner, it's been a pleasure to have you here. And sir, we wish you well in your future endeavors, of
Thank you.
course. We will miss you as a people, but we know that Guyana is better off for you having been here for 5.5 years, sir. Thank you, and to your wonderful family, our best of regards. From a Guyanese to a Brit. Have a good...
Thank you very much, Hugh.
Great, thank you, sir. And have a good
you,
evening.
Leonard. Have a good weekend.
You too, sir. Bye-bye.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was our High Commissioner, British High Commissioner to Guyana. He has said his parting words to us all here, as you know, and he will be leaving his post here in Guyana shortly. By the end of this month, he will be leaving. Leonard, we are welcoming Mr. Dominic Gaskin into room 592 to discuss his perspectives on politics. But that was quite an interesting discussion with the High Commissioner, wasn't it?
Yes, I always I had a lot of interactions with diplomats over my years, and he was one of them that I always had. I would say that I have good memories of. Very warm, and he always a good one to crack a joke and so a smile. So he's going to be missed, but I'm glad that he says he's not going to be far away. And room 592 is always very much open. So good night
Great.
also to Mr. Hans Dominic. How are you doing, sir?
How are you, sir? Welcome.
Pretty good.
Thank you very much. Good evening to you, gentlemen. Good evening to your viewers. Good to be on your program tonight.
Great. Well, welcome to room 591. Let me ask you, what is that piece of machinery up above your head there?
It's a shortwave radio.
It's a shortwave radio?
I don't know what it is. It looks like that.
Machinery. You sure we're looking at the same screen?
I'm looking at something that seems to be behind you that has a little handle on it. Are you sure it's not the money chest that you have exposed to the entire viewership?
I wish. No, it's a painting. Not a piece of equipment.
Yeah. Well, welcome once again. And ladies and gentlemen, please join us in welcoming Mr. Dominic Gaskin, Hans Gaskin, to room 592. Mr. Gaskin, you have certainly made the news on a number of times because you stood up and you spoke out for what you believed in, sir. And let me applaud you for doing that. And I would like to start the ball rolling. Bowl the first ball at you. What's Mr. Dominic Gaskin's perspective of politics as of today, the 14th of August, 2020, sir?
And I'm assuming that you mean politics in Guyana.
Politics in Guyana.
Well, I can't say I have a complete perspective, but basically my perspective on the political situation that took place this year, I'm very glad that it's over, that it has been resolved in a way that would appear to be acceptable to as many Guyanese as possible. I am disappointed that it took the course that it did. I believe that it has set us back in terms of our democracy, in terms of the way the rest of the world sees us. It has set us back maybe a decade or two. I'm very disappointed that the various powers that be allowed it to be so prolonged and to really create the kind of uncertainty that it did, both at home and abroad. I think it was a pretty bad year for Guyana, and it has certainly stained us unnecessarily. That said, like I said, I am happy that it has been resolved. I think we as a people will, get beyond this. We have a country to develop. There's a lot of good news, and I think sometimes we can get bogged down with the bad news. The good news is that we still have oil. We still have gold. We still have bauxite. We're still producing rice. We have an economy that is resilient, that is going to grow this year, unlike many of our Caribbean sister nations, and unlike many countries in the world, to be honest. So, you know, there's a lot to look forward to. And as a Guyanese, I want to wish the new government lots of luck. They'll need it, and wish them all the best in, you know, managing the country and its resources over the next 5 years.
Mr. Gaskin, you were a former business minister of business. In terms of our growth, the president, Ali, mentioned over 58% projected growth, maybe not right now, but in the near future. Putting on your minister of business cap that you would have had sometime, do you see that kind of growth as a reality within the next 2 years, sir?
Well, I think the projection is basically sound. GDP growth for 2020 to be in the vicinity of around 50%, down from the earlier projected 80-something%. So that is the reality, and is largely going to be due to the oil production.
That's right.
And the revenues and the money earned from oil exports. Also, we can't ignore the fact that gold prices are at an all-time high, and we're still producing fairly large amount of gold. That is going to also add to this year's GDP or GDP growth. So I'm not disputing his projections at all. Of course, come next year, you know, once you have a 50-something% economic growth in GDP growth in 1 year, it's highly unlikely that you will sustain that level of growth. So it's going to go back down to something. Hopefully, it's going to go back down to something that's more sustainable in the long term. And I would like to think that could be realistically about 5%, maybe 6% growth per annum over the following 5 years. And that would be actually excellent for Guyana.
Right. Now, a question for you, sir. Remember the status or the state of sugar, the sugar industry. And the PPP government has signaled an intention to invest. Whatever they're going to do will require investment in sugar to get it back going. Would Mr. Gaskin agree that sugar be a priority, or should they really do an assessment before investing the oil money into sugar?
I think it's almost suicidal to invest oil revenues in sugar. Having said that, when I say invest, I think the estates that are currently operational require large amounts of capital investment, and I think that should be done by this government.
Right.
In terms of reopening the closed estates and investing monies in reopening those estates, I think that would be suicidal. Or let me put it a little mild. I think it would be a bad idea. Okay. It won't be value for money. There are other things that we can invest in. Many other things.
Got you. Sir, I want to come right down to politics. You did, in your closing paragraph of your two earlier epistles, your messages, you made some recommendations to the AFC, of which you would have been part and parcel of. What's your thoughts of AFC today? Do you think that the AFC can survive what missteps it may have entered into for the 5 months?
I think it can survive. I think it is up to the current leadership of the AFC to ensure that the party survives. That, of course, will require a completely different posture from what I'm currently seeing, or from what the party has been, or the party's the way the party has positioned itself over the last few months. The truth is, and I think we all know, that the AFC is a small party. It has a small support base, but small yet substantial. It was enough, we had enough electoral support to win 7 seats independently in 2011. We got 35,000 votes. We had enough votes to actually join or form a coalition with the APNU and win an election in 2015. Now, we can argue about the numbers that the AFC brought to the table in the 2020 elections, but the mere fact that the coalition won 217,000 votes in 2020, up from 205,000 votes in 2015, is an indication that the AFC did bring some value to the coalition, because I don't think that the APNU alone could have won 217,000 votes. But like I said, various people will give you different estimates of what the AFC would have brought to the table. But the bottom line is that the votes or the support base of the AFC is different from the support base of the APNU or the PNC.
Gotcha.
And that is something that we have to recognize, that the AFC needs to recognize if it wants to survive.
Gotcha.
In other words, it needs to appeal to its traditional support base, the support base that got it to where it was in 2015. And that is not the same as the APNU's support base. And I believe that the AFC has tried a little too hard to appeal to the APNU supporters rather than to focus on its own constituents, the people who made the AFC what it is or what it was. And if it goes back to that support base with maybe fresh ideas, maybe even some fresh faces, and some commitments, I think it can regain its critical position and critical role that it played in Guyana's politics over the last decade or so.
Right. Are you still a member of the AFC, sir?
I am a member. I am not an active member currently, or not very active.
Okay. And one, let me ask you this. Did you talk to Dad recently? Or what do you call Mr. Gray, President Gray? Do you call him Dad, father, father-in-law? Have you spoken? How is he doing, sir?
I haven't had a conversation with him recently, but we've always had a good relationship, a cordial relationship, and I would assume that relationship will continue. I think family ties transcend short-term political differences. But I don't want to focus on that. I think that is not really relevant to Guyana's politics.
Let me ask you this. A few persons have expressed an opinion that Mr. Dominic Gaskin spoke out because of the threat of sanctions, and that because you are a dual citizen. What's your comment to that, sir? As you know, you can't please everybody, right? So people are going to come at you.
Yeah, that's nonsense. I mean, I'm not worried if somebody wants to believe that. That's fine. To be honest with you, I didn't think the threats of sanctions and individual visa revocations and all of that, I thought it was a bluff, to be honest with you. So I never took it very seriously, because I know I've never really seen sanctions such as those applied so early in the game. So I was quite surprised when they actually went ahead and did it. But my saying what I have to say has nothing to do with my citizenship. It has nothing to do with sanctions. It has nothing to do with foreign countries and the pressures that they are exerting. I say what I have to say because it's what I
Certainly,
believe. It's
you certainly had a vision for the AFC and you wanted to ensure you were able to align your thoughts there, you would think?
well, I liked the AFC. That's why I joined the AFC. I liked what the AFC had to offer. Um, I thought the AFC could have been, and in fact, the AFC did or was the balance of power for a short period of time. And I think the AFC, the next logical step was to get into government, which the AFC successfully achieved. I think the circumstances under which the AFC came into government, or not came into government, but was forced to govern, that is as part of a coalition, a pre-election coalition, where we were actually on the same list as the APNU, as opposed to a totally independent coalition partner, made it a bit of a challenge. And I think the AFC, during its first or during its term in office, as a coalition partner, in retrospect, may have placed too much emphasis on maintaining the coalition, probably to the detriment of the AFC as a party, an independent party. I think it was important that the coalition be maintained for at least one term, because I think coalition politics is could be the future of our country. And I therefore, me personally, I was very interested in ensuring and seeing the coalition work and survive the first term. But I know that in doing so, the AFC would have lost some support, because it might have been felt by some of our supporters that we were perhaps bending over backwards to appease our coalition partners. And some might even have felt that, oh, y'all get into power and, that's it. You're no longer interested in the party. But I think there were sound reasons for wanting the coalition to survive. Having said that, the position taken by the AFC post March 2nd, I feel was not the right position for a party such as the AFC. I certainly was not happy and did not want to be associated with the position taken by the AFC after the Mingo Declaration. And the rest is history. You know my position on that.
Correct. Leonard?
Yes, thank you very much, dear sir. What would you say to the public perception that the AFC might have been complicit, fully in bed with the APNU, with an attempt to rig this election? Would it be a fair assessment of the people of Guyana, or at least a part of Guyana?
Well, I don't believe that to be the case. And I also don't believe that the AFC or APNU as political organizations or parties attempted to rig the election. I believe there was an attempt to rig the election. I do believe that it may have involved individuals associated with or part of one or both AFC and the APNU. But certainly this was not something that was sanctioned by the parties, and I don't believe that. So that would be my response. Of course, people will believe what they want to believe, and I don't think that the AFC did itself any favors after that attempt to rig the elections took place, by either ignoring the attempt or denying it, or actually trying to be the beneficiaries of what was a clearly blatant attempt to falsify the results of the election.
Thank you, sir. And were you ever? Do you have any indications whether the Alliance for Change might be asking you to go to Parliament? I think there's about 10 seats, according to Comrade Ramsden Leader, that might be in play. Would you be interested, or do you have any indications, sir, whether they'd be asking you to go with them.
No, that won't happen. I'm not on the list of candidates, so there's no way I'm going to Parliament. And I'm not qualified to sit in Parliament based on the Chief Justice's interpretation of the Constitution provision on dual citizenship, which she rendered last year. So no, I have no intention of going to Parliament. I'm not on the list of candidates.
And back to the elections, there's this whole big issue with the statement of polls, and which I think the opposition would have said, based on what they have in their possession, they know that they have won. Did you ever had a look at the statement of polls that would have been out there that maybe was in the coalition's possession?
I worked on election day or election night in my area, and we did collect statements of polls. We were not the custodians of those statements of polls. APNU took control of the statements of polls. But we did do a tabulation. We did have a tabulation exercise where we would have photographed the statements of poll that we collected, and those were then sent to a central, to a center that where persons were engaged in recording those in a spreadsheet and doing a tabulation. So I had access to those tabulations that we did.
And your conclusions from them, based on what your party would have had, what you would have had in your possession, or what you would have seen, was there a conclusion that that the coalition would have won?
No, not based on what I saw. Based on all the information that I had, because my unfortunately my spreadsheet was not complete. But based on the information available to me, it would have been very difficult for us to have won the election. And certainly it would have been almost impossible for Mr. Mingo's numbers to have been accurate. And furthermore, if I can add, a lot of the information available at the time that I had access to correlated with the PPP's statements of poll that they had made public.
Right. Mr. Gaskin, the country will, of course, remember that it was no other than senior executives of the AFC that stood up and said that based on the statement of polls they saw, they have won. I mean, I remember David Patterson saying so. I remember Kemal Ramjatan not necessarily talking about the statement of polls, but saying we have won. These men would have seen the same statement of polls you would have seen, I presume. That aside, I mean, we can relitigate that over and over and over, but that aside, the problem I think that the AFC has is one of trust, where the population can now question whether it would trust AFC leadership anymore. The AFC going forward then, if you were to remain a member, should the executives probably be relieved of their positions? That's one. And two, if the AFC remains in the coalition, is there not a danger of being submerged, subsumed, and being dissolved?
Well, I think I to answer your last question first, yes. And maybe not even deliberately, it is just something that will inevitably happen to a smaller party in coalition with a larger entity, and perhaps exacerbated by what has occurred recently and the loss perhaps of a significant portion of its own support base. Mm-hmm. So yes, I do think that there's a danger of that happening. Unfortunately, the AFC doesn't have much of a choice where that is concerned, because it contested the election on the same list of candidates, and therefore it is bound more or less to the coalition, at least for the duration of the 12th Parliament. Now, that does not mean that it has to necessarily follow whatever the APNU proposes, or does not have to mean, doesn't necessarily mean that it can't, that it has to vote with whatever the APNU decides to vote on. How they work that out between them, I'm not sure how that will happen, but you know, I think political parties in coalitions need to have constant dialogue and need to thrash out these things. In terms of your earlier question about the credibility or the loss of credibility, that's something that I think you would have to ask the individual members themselves. Maybe they have their own explanations for taking the positions that they took. I can only explain the position that I took. I don't want to sit in and judge anyone. Politics is politics. People take positions. Personally, I think that the position taken by the AFC post March 2nd was strategically unsound for a party like the AFC, because I think it's a position that did not go down well with the support base of the AFC. Right. And therefore, it leaves the AFC in a bit of a bind right now, because who or what is the support base of the AFC? It has to now regain the trust of its supporters and rebuild the party. And I would recommend a few fresh faces in the mix, certainly. But I don't want to go out knocking the leadership of the AFC, because I want to say this. What the AFC achieved and what Mr. Ramjatan and Mr. Trotman created is almost unprecedented around the world, and certainly in our neck of the woods. It was a bold move. It was a successful move. And I think it shows a good understanding of the local political scene by both gentlemen. I'm forgetting Ms. Sheila Holder, I apologize. But Ms. Sheila Holder was the third leader of the party and the founding member, and she also brought a lot to bear in terms of the strategic direction that the AFC took in its initial years. And I don't want to just flush all of that down the toilet, so to speak. I think it bears mentioning right now. So I would be the last person to know, on the basis of what I consider perhaps poor judgment on the part of the leadership of the AFC, to want to write them off or condemn them, because I still have a tremendous respect for the leadership of the AFC. I just don't, I disagree strongly with the position they took on the matter that we're discussing, or on elections, recent elections. But certainly I don't want to use that as a basis for writing them off politically in any way. But I think the AFC could benefit from fresh faces, at least in the public image of the AFC, and perhaps the leadership can do some work in the background to really build the party, because I know they have the skills and the ability to do that.
Right, correct. Leonard?
Yes, thank you very much, dear sir. Where does this leave? Do you believe this is the end of the road, sir, for Mr. Moses Nagamutu, somebody who's been around decades?
I am not sure. I don't know. I have no idea what Mr. Nagamutu's plans are. So I can't answer your question. I honestly have no thoughts on that.
And to come back to when you would have made some conclusions based on the evidence that you would have had from the statement of polls, when you would have showed those, did you, my first question, sir, did you show that to your colleagues within the AFC?
My colleagues would have had access to the same information that I had. Whether they would have given it the attention that I gave to it is a different matter. But certainly, before I went public with my first statement or Facebook post, I did bring to the attention of the leadership of the Alliance for Change that I am not comfortable with the position that the AFC has taken, and further that I will not support such a position if that position remains.
And what was the response to that?
Mixed response, but suffice to say that by the end of a week, of the week following my bringing this to the attention of the leadership, I didn't detect any intention to revisit the position taken by the party. I didn't think that I was being I didn't think that my position was going to prevail, put it that way.
Mm-hmm. And I want to bring you to another something that has been bothering me personally. I'm not sure about Yog, but I'm sure that this is something that's been bothering a lot of Guyanese people. Sir, the damage, the ethnic lines, the ethnic message, the divisive messages that were out there. In your opinion, in your assessment, how much damage has been done to our people, to the psyche of the people?
It's very hard to assess because we are also a very forgiving and live and let live people. I think a lot of persons said things which I'm sure they may regret. But when I say a lot of persons, are they really? This is not a majority. Huh? A lot of the very nasty, insightful Facebook posts, because most of it was on Facebook or on other chats. So when you cumulatively, what do they amount to? As a percentage of our population, it's a small but very vocal section of the population that is really engaged in this ethnically divisive commentary and behavior. A lot of people who I speak to have their political views. Their political views may even be race-based, but they certainly do not carry any sort of what's the word I'm looking for? I mean, I don't detect that they are anti the other race. I don't believe that they have been affected by the outpouring of nastiness on social media. And so I think a lot of people are disappointed, but in terms of their personal attitudes towards other races, I don't think that what we are seeing out there is a reflection of the way most Guyanese feel.
Right.
I see people going about their business, laughing, joking, and doing their thing, regardless of how they feel politically or where their political loyalties lie. I'm seeing a lot of that. So I would want to believe that the ethnic divide is more of a political divide, or it's exacerbated by political tensions, and that when those political tensions are resolved or recede, then we go about, our business as usual and do what we have to do. And I sincerely hope that I'm right in feeling that way.
And
Gaskin, Leonard, let me just add to your question there, Leonard. If we can just expand that a little bit more, because there is no talk of an economic resistance, where persons are talking about boycotting certain types of businesses and certain types of business persons. I mean, as a businessman, both you and everybody else would know that that will take us all nowhere. But what's your response to this political call for economic resistance?
I haven't heard that call from the political parties. I've seen it in various comments on social media, but I haven't heard any political party take that position. And I would want to believe that this is something that is being instigated or incited by a small handful of people who have their own, I guess, agenda, political views, or whatever we want to call it. I think it's misguided to a certain extent. You know, we're all Guyanese, and when we start declaring economic war on each other, it's not likely to be in the best interest of the country as a whole. I think what we want is a competitive economy. We want, I mean, to be fair, let's not also ignore the elephant in the room, which is that there is a fair amount of let's say, discrimination existing within our economy. People do tend to hire their own. People do tend to support their own. So that does exist. And we can't ignore it. I don't have the solutions for those who feel that perhaps the economy is requires some sort of rebalancing, that too much economic resources are in the hands of one ethnicity. These are discussions that I think are valid and should be had. Right. Like I said, I don't think the solution lies in boycott this person or boycott this store or boycott this ethnicity. I don't think that will that's right. A solution. But certainly in terms of how do we share the wealth of this country in a way that makes us all a little more comfortable, how do we ensure that no one segment of the population, whether it's by ethnicity or geographically or even by gender, is marginalized, you know, in our economy. I think those are all discussions that we should be mature enough to have. Mm-hmm. And you know, all the people who are advocating for certain types of measures or who are instigating certain types of economic behavior, I think should be part of that discussion. And, you know, it bears further examination. I think the state also has a responsibility to ensure that the pie is not gobbled up by any one segment of our population. So there's a lot to be said for the conversation itself taking place, but I don't think that based on the elections, and if this is a reaction to what took place between March 2nd and now, I think it's very unfortunate and I think it's misguided. Because I don't see the issue being one of race or ethnicity. I believe there was an attempt to commit a fraud, and we should all acknowledge it. If you don't want to acknowledge it at this point, at least it should be investigated by GCOM. GCOM, I think, owes the country an explanation about what happened and how Mr. Mingo was able to make declarations that bore no resemblance to the actual results on the statements of poll. And there must be some legal action taken to ensure that if there is culpability, especially if it was deliberate, that the consequences are borne by those who participated in that. So I don't think it's an ethnic issue. If they acted on the basis of ethnicity, that's their problem. Whatever they did, if it was illegal and if it is found to be illegal, they should be dealt with by the law. And we as a people should not be defending what they did simply because of their ethnicity. And I don't think that too many people are actually going to defend them when they find out that there was a deliberate attempt to rig the elections.
Yes,
Leonard?
yes. Thank you very much, dear sir. I want to bring you to two questions I have here, sir. You are the president's son-in-law, and in addition to that, you were a former business minister. So I want to ask you, sir, how much of a pressure was this to you that you were the lone, probably at times, the lone dissenting voice in the party and maybe in the coalition? How much of a pressure did you face from this?
I wouldn't say I faced any pressure. I did think twice before I went public with my position, but I said what I had to say, and I really don't. Sorry, am I still on?
Yes, yes, you are. Go ahead.
Okay, because I'm not seeing you. My screen seems to have changed. Yeah. So no, I didn't feel any pressure, but I was cognizant of the fact that yes, I am connected to the party, and it does give it makes for an interesting story, and it could be exploited also. It could be taken out of context. Yes, but sometimes if you want to do the right thing or you want to say the right thing, you just go ahead and do it, and whatever the consequences are, so be it.
Yes.
Right.
Thank you very much for that. And sir, Christopher Jones, after March the 2nd, on the end of the month, at the end of the month of March, he was the sports director. A contract was signed according to what was reported in the media. Mr. Harmon appointed to the COVID-19 task force as the CEO of the Secretariat. What are your thoughts about this whole debate that's raging right now about political appointments, and the numbers, and creating a parallel public service structure there?
I think every government will have political appointees. I myself, as minister, was a political appointee, and I'm sure that my subsequent appointment as director of business can be deemed a political appointment. The issue with political appointments is that they should come to an end when the term of office of that government comes to an end. And that person should either resign, depending on how sensitive the position is, and certainly they should not be given long-term appointments. And certainly in an election year, I'm not in favor of long-term appointments for political appointees. If you just come into office and you're making a few political appointees, which could include ambassadors, which could include a number of positions, a 3-year contract, I don't have a problem with. But certainly, just before an election or just after an election, while there's a contentious election being in the process of being resolved, for long-term appointments, I don't think that is wise. I don't think it's a good idea.
Yog?
Yes.
I would like to add to that, though, that there are political appointments that are normal for any government. There are other political appointments that are an abuse of government's powers. In other words, taking persons and making them heads of agencies or heads of government departments without a competitive process, without attempting to get the best fit for the job. I believe that is an abuse, especially where those positions require technical expertise or require management skills. To just take politically loyal party members and plug them into those positions, I believe is an abuse of government power. It probably won't go away. I am hoping that over the years, with every change of government, we'll have less and less of those appointments.
Right.
The PPP did it. The coalition did it to a certain extent. I'm not going to argue which was worse, but it has been a practice in Guyana for many decades now. And I think it's a practice that should be certainly reduced and kept to a minimum.
Yeah, I mean, it is obvious that first tranche would be loyalists, second tranche might be the cheerleaders, and fourth or fifth or sixth or 10th tranche might be professionals. It's political season. We all know what happens. But, sir, there has been some unfortunate revelations. And, I'm not saying any of the political parties are angels, but there would have been some revelations that there are persons who were appointed double down, triple down, quadruple down in some cases, where they have 4 or 5 different portfolio from various ministries and so forth. And I think what has happened, it would have really dented people's perspectives of this whole thing that you guys came into office with, that is the good life. And people are now saying it seems like it was a good life for some. My main question to you then, would Mr. Dominic Gaskin, as of today, tell political appointees of APNU AFC just pack up and go? Should they expect any rewards from the state if their contract was renewed post March 2020?
It really depends. I mean, in principle, perhaps I would agree with you, but it does depend on the circumstances. For instance, let's say the COVID situation was an emergency that required a response. If appointments were made to a COVID task force or something like that, of that nature, and those were made after March 2nd, that's a bit different to an extension or a renewal of a contract for 3 years after March 2nd. I mean, we had a situation where certain persons whose contract expired earlier this year or late last year were put on a month-to-month or working on a month-to-month basis. And I think that's perfectly in order.
Yeah.
And I think those persons can either resign if they choose to, or if the incoming government asks them to resign, then they should resign. It could be that some of them have performed creditably and the government coming in will have no reason to dismiss them. So it all depends on performance. If they have been performing, it would be rather petty for a government to come in and just get rid of them.
But
if they're not performing and are just purely political appointees, then they should resign when the government loses the election.
Let's take it a step further in terms of your assessment, having been in government yourself, sir. Now, there would be cases where persons are political appointees. How does a politician then tread that fine line between, okay, let me let Dominic Gaskin go because he was on the political trail, he was campaigning, versus how do you view, for example, Yulita Moore is an employee of the Ministry of Health, but was a prominent name in an elections case that was deemed by everybody to have just prolonged an election declaration. How would a Hans Gaskin, if you were the current government of Guyana, view a Yulita Moore, for example?
Well, without going into the personalities, if you're a public servant and you're on the pensionable establishment, you're a public servant, and you want to, I don't know that the public service rules preclude political activity. I don't know the extent to which they do. But I think public servants, like any other Guyanese, have a right to engage in political activity. And therefore, a public servant who is hired as a public servant by the Public Service Commission should not be victimized for expressing their political opinion as long as they operate professionally in the capacity in which they are hired. The contracted employees, I think, are different.
Right.
And their contracts should be honored if those contracts were entered into in good faith, which is not always easy to establish. I admit that. But some things, I guess, are glaringly obvious. Some appointments. Look, when we came into office in 2015, we met a number of contracted employees whose contracts had just been renewed for 3 years. Right. There were quite a few of them. So this is something that is not peculiar to our government. It seems to be something that is done, and I'm sure there are other countries where the same thing happens.
Right.
I don't have all the solutions, but
the overriding question I have for you then is, and I'm going to wrap up. We're going to wrap up in a couple of minutes just now. But my overriding question for you, if you have Leonard Gildarie as your employee and you are a manager of a business and he's working with you, and he takes certain actions, you would have to, as a manager, you would have to question whether you can trust Leonard to serve your vision. Isn't that the bottom line at the end of the day?
Yes, and that's why I said the performance, depend if the employee is performing the functions that he or she has been hired to perform, then we have no problem. If the extracurricular activities of the employee are affecting their performance at work, then we have a problem. And if the employee is, because of his or her political persuasion, deliberately undermining the work of the entity, be it government or private company, then again, we have a problem. So I think a lot of it has to be, these things are can be delicate. There's no one hard and fast rule that we can apply. I think it does require a certain amount of discretion, and I hope that the new government has that discretion, has the ability to separate, different circumstances and different types of behavior, and not just want to paint everyone with the same brush. But we'll have to wait and find out. I think interfering with people's livelihoods is not something that we should take lightly.
And you said it, you said it well. At the end of the day, performance has to be the watchword. And, especially one would think that when you move, you were a minister, when you move and you go into a job, taking over a ministry, you would put your vision out there and you would tell people, look, I need your loyalty, I need your support and everything else. And then you evaluate the performance therefrom, isn't it?
Yes, and generally, I think people throughout the public service are prepared to support the government of the day. I have not found any, during my time in office, I haven't encountered any employees who were deliberately trying to undermine the work of the government, regardless of where their political loyalties lay. I don't ask people which party they vote for, which party they like. I don't never involved politics in the work of the ministry. And I had no problems or issues with staff, or whether they're heads of department, senior staff, junior staff, in terms of political loyalty, or in terms of any sort of deliberate undermining of the work of the ministry because of their political views. I never encountered that as a problem. Or maybe it happened and I just didn't notice it.
Right. Thank you. Mr. Gaskin, my last question for you. Under the APNO AFC government, Mahadeo had applied a moniker to the whole state media. I call the Guyana Chronicle the Guyana RAG. And I stand by those words, and I believe it is still the RAG. My personal position has been that government would tend to, by nature, abuse state media. What is Dominic Gaskin's position on state media, and especially NCN Chronicle going forward, sir?
I think it is possible for government to own media houses, whether it's the Chronicle or whether it's NCN, and allow them to operate independently with within general guidelines. I think it's entirely possible. I also think it's desirable. I think it's utterly foolish for any government to create what you would call a RAG. It doesn't serve the purpose that it was intended for.
Right.
I don't read the Chronicle. I didn't read it prior to 2015. I started reading it, in government, and then I stopped reading it after a while. Unfortunately, it's unfortunate I have to say this, but the bottom line is that if you're a government and you have ownership or responsibility for state media, I think it behoves you to ensure that those media houses become credible entities, credible media operations. And then you can use it for, you'll be more successful in what you're trying to achieve, right, if you work on building credibility of the state media. And then perhaps you can inject a little bit of your own, when it comes election time, you can take advantage of your incumbency to get your message out in a way that is a little more advantageous to you than the opposition. And that would happen in any instance. But when you destroy the credibility of the state media, that's just poor political skills. It's poor strategy. It makes no sense because people look at the Chronicle and automatically, and there are other newspapers too that you can say the same thing for. I'm not singling out the Chronicle, but it's state-owned, right, and that's why we're having this discussion.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, Mr. Gaskin, thank you for that, sir. And I know Leonard wants to ask you a final one. Leonard?
Yes, thank you, sir. It's been very engaging. I like your forthrightness and your honesty. I want to ask you, sir, if this is the end of the political road for Hans Dominic Gaskin, what is it? If the government of the day, the People's Progressive Party Civic, asks you to serve, would you be willing?
No, I'm not interested in a political future. I don't want to get involved in party politics anymore. I believe, made my contribution to a party that I liked. I have been very fortunate in being given the opportunity to serve at the highest levels within the party and within the government as a result of my involvement in politics. And I'm grateful for that. But at this point, I think I would like to take a break from party politics. I don't want to be an MP or a minister again. If I can contribute in any other way to anything that is positive and developmental for Guyana, certainly, but I'm not interested in becoming, getting involved in party politics anymore.
Right. Maybe we could add in the word "not at this stage."
They say never say never, So
that's right. Because we still have to look at the reason you joined it was Guyana, not Hans Gaskin, but Guyana, and so the Guyana will always remain. Mr. Gaskin, it's been a pleasure to have you in room 592, sir. We know that we have thrown some bouncers and so forth at you, but I must say, all respect to you, irrespective of how we have pushed you and asked you questions, you have been very forthright and very honest. And I think I'm going to throw this last little curveball at you. You really speak to the banner that the entire coalition campaign on. That is honesty and integrity, and I'm proud of you standing up for that, sir. And on behalf of the viewers and listeners, our thanks. We appreciate you being here, Mr. Gaskin, and we look forward to future engagements.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, and a pleasant good night to all your viewers. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. And ladies and gentlemen, it's been a pleasure to have you all in room 592. We look forward to your company on Monday evening again, when we will be joined by the Attorney General, Mr. Anil Nandalal, in room 592. And at 7:30 sharp on Monday, we'll have a little brief look at the economy from one of our local economists, a little preview before Mr. Nandalal joins us. So Monday night looks to be very interesting. Leonard, what's the plan for the weekend?
Well, the weekend is that I have work and more work. I'm going to be off a couple of days next week. I have to, but we are always here. And of course, Mr. Gaskin and you guys are always going to be there. So that's a good thing. And that's me being the diplomat.
Good. Well, thanks to the boys. Thanks to the team at Kaieteur Radio, the technical team, Raj, Kevin, Joshua, and everybody there. Leonard, thanks to you, Mr. Gaskin. Thank you. Do have a great night. And to your family from room 592, our respect and regards to them all. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been a pleasure to have you here. Remember, wherever you've been joining us from, do say a prayer for this beautiful country of ours. It is still the best place on this planet. God be with you. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye now.
Thank you.
COVID-19 tips sponsored by Dex Soap. 1. Practice social distancing. 2. Wear your mask when leaving the house. 3. Wash your hands regularly for 20 seconds using our Dex Soap. 4. Cover your nose and mouth with a disposable tissue or flex elbow when you cough or sneeze. Choose Dex Soap for that extra cleanliness. Dex Soap is affordable and available nationwide.
Kaieteur Radio.
Covering Guyana from coast to coast.
Demerara and Essequibo 99.1 FM.
Berbice 99.5 FM. Kaieteur Radio.